Welcome to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read along podcast. The Wheel of Time turns and ages come and pass, leaving memories that become legend. Legend fades to myth, and even myth is long forgotten when the age that gave it birth comes again.
That is your host, Greg, who somehow still knows very little about the Wheel of Time, even though he usually pretends otherwise.
And that is Tylor, our resident expert, who makes sure you know how much he knows about the Wheel of Time.
It's a lot. Join us each week as we continue our journey through Robert Jordan's great fantasy epic, exploring the books, the television show, ill-advised discussions of visual media on a non-visual podcast, and so much more. Although actually not, it's just that.
Yes, all that and actually nothing else as we travel on, and I know what this means now, through the glass columns.
Yeah, he really doesn't know all that much.
No, you don't know that much.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Through the Glass Columns, your weekly Wheel of Time read-along podcast. I, of course, am Tylor, your host who knows these books and loves these books and has honestly been a little sad that in real life, Greg and I haven't read in a couple of weeks. And I am joined by Greg, who probably enjoyed his vacation or whatever, the reason we didn't read. Greg, how are you enjoying things? And do you have any idea what happened in these book series prior to these chapters?
Well, I enjoyed my vacation mightily and did a lot of reading, including some fantasy reading. And I have to admit, even still, I missed Wheel of Time. I mean, it is just the nature of when the calendar fell, but to take a break with the kind of last 200 pages to go was a little rough. So I'm really glad to be back. A lot of my reading, I did the thing where I sped through the last 200 pages of a book in one night. I'm like, this is what I want to be doing. But I don't really mean that. I love our podcast and I love how we do it. It's just it's such a different kind of reading experience. So, there are some parts of this book I remember really, really well, like they happened yesterday, and there are some points which I will never possibly remember again. I am dreading the incoming end of season episode where you're asking me all the POVs and other things like that. But I think last book we got that kind of mid-book climax with the Battle of Kyrian, as you'll recall, and it felt like we weren't going to get any other excitement, and then we got that kind of double climax excitement. I don't know if we're going to get that this time. What do you think?
I can't answer that question because I'm the host who knows things. Greg is very smug and satisfied right now because due to technical issues, this is the second time we're recording this intro, and I just asked Greg that question about 5 minutes ago and then had to cut him off more or less in the middle of his answer. I tend to think these middle books feel different than the early three in that the first three, it kind of feels almost forced. The last 200 pages are everyone must get to the same place. Let's figure out how. And I feel like these books are maybe a little freer since we know that the characters don't necessarily all end up in the same place. I can say no more. What do you think about the structure? Because that was a very insightful question that you just asked, Greg.
I think it doesn't feel like we're headed to another giant battle. There are a couple plot lines kind of ticking away, so it wouldn't be totally out of nowhere if we went to the battle with the Forsaken One in Tyr, or maybe a conflict between the factions of the Aes Sedai. But it feels to me like we're headed towards a heist climax in Ebu Dar, and that might be kind of all we get here, and the rest of the pieces keep spinning. In the first chapter tonight, I think we got some of that more deep tease, some kind of Thom backstory, future story kind of questions that I'm sure we'll start unpacking momentarily. And that to me felt like Robert Jordan is playing a much longer game now than he was in those early books. So it works. I mean, all of it just makes me want to keep reading. I keep glancing longingly to my left at the shelf full of all the future volumes I've now purchased. And it's like, let's keep going. Let's keep seeing what we can find. But it takes time, and it takes actually recording some weeks for us to move forward.
Yeah, that's the frustrating part, is having to get our schedules together before we can read more of the Wheel of Time. Luckily, we only have 6 weeks left after this week. We are plowing ahead and getting towards the end of the book. And you know how we get further on? I summarized Chapter 40, Unexpected Laughter. Matt tries to convince...
Whoa. Before you do that, we haven't in this episode, or this episode attempt, said the names of the chapters. So just in case anybody is confused, this is Chapter 40, Unexpected Laughter, and Chapter 41, A Threat. So Tylor will now summarize Chapter 40. I haven't heard a summary yet tonight, but I do know that you've already said the information I just gave twice, which is why you forgot to give it now. So
that is
the
correct.
Summary, please.
Matt tries to convince Thom to talk to the women about their plans, but Thom is too busy staring at the letter that Matt gave him from Rand. Thom tells of when he tried to rescue a woman from her husband, and he offered to take her away, but he learned eventually that she loved her husband and that she was actually the controlling one in the relationship. Thom says Matt should not assume he knows the whole story, and he tells Matt that they leave for Ibudar in mere days, and every time that Matt objects, Thom says that he is saving the girl from the bootmaker and not actually solving a real problem. Thom says if Matt helps them in Ibudar, then he might actually get what he wants, as the women would eventually head to Camelin. Thom says he thinks that Egwene has the backbone to be the Merlin, but he also points out how precarious her position is, and Thom advises Matt not to try to change the women's plans at all. Matt then asks about the woman the letter is from, and Thom says that he left her, and Matt immediately kind of is confused about this, and then as soon as Thom leaves, dismisses his advice entirely. He then spots Nynaeve, who more or less runs away from him, and then Matt approaches the group of the band who are in town, and he sends Chel Vannin, his best scout, on a risky trip out to tell Telmanas to hold tight because he is going to stay in the village for some time. He claims that this is all part of his plan, but internally he is frustrated at how far things have gotten from his actual plan. We then switch into Elayne's POV, as she notes that the talk of Saladar is Matt, but most are ignoring how Rand and Matt found them in Saladar. Aviendha also occasions quite a bit of comment, but some are saying that she will become a novice, and Elayne obviously doubts this. Birgitte then reports that there are two Aes Sedai, Vandene and Adelias, who will accompany them to Ibudar, and Elayne thinks that they are being sent more or less as chaperones for her and Nynaeve. Elayne then asks Birgitte about whether or not Egwene can be told about her identity, and Birgitte says that those who know her, or actually who she is, have too high of expectations for her, and she is afraid that she cannot possibly live up to those expectations. Birgitte admits that admitting who she is scares her, and Birgitte says that she will think on telling Egwene, and then eventually admonishes Arena, the person who is studying under her for archery. Elayne then hurries to Aviendha, who is in Wetlander clothes and uncomfortably being studied by a number of Aes Sedai. Elayne uses her priority as the most powerful in the room to pull away Aviendha, and the Aes Sedai are clearly displeased by this because they don't truly think of her as Aes Sedai. They then go to Elayne's room to speak in private, and Elayne worries how determined Aviendha seems and mentions that Matt says Aviendha wants to kill Elayne. Aviendha eventually says that she loves Rand and has Lane with him, and she asks Elayne to either beat her or kill her to meet her toe. After a brief temptation to do exactly that, Elayne forgives Aviendha, and Aviendha is surprised that Elayne seems willing to share Rand, and then Aviendha eventually says that she might be willing to do that, but they would need to be much closer in order for that to happen. Elayne then mentions that there is another who loves Rand, and Aviendha immediately draws her blade. Elayne says that Min is a near sister, and she eventually has to convince Aviendha not to go in and kill Min with her. Aviendha eventually says that she must get to know Min if she is going to share Rand with her, and Elayne thinks that everything is always complicated, and Aviendha says it always is when men are involved, and they begin to laugh unexpectedly. So this is one of those chapters that I think pushed the plot forward a lot, and I have like a whole of 3 notes of things to say about it in my notes. What did you think of this chapter? And it feels like a kind of in-betweener as we were talking about the structure. How do you categorize this in our big plot versus character development kind of schema?
Yeah, I mean, I saw a movie last night. I was thinking a lot about the way you structure our D&D games, because in the movie there were characters moving place to place, and it was like big action set pieces, and then it was like small little character development conversations, and that's when you as a DM are like, all right, you're on this ship for a day. Do you have any conversations, or do you sit alone and sulk, right? Or something like that. And so this felt like absolutely one of those moments. It's like we're about to go off, and these characters aren't going to be together anymore, so we have to kind of have some interactions and develop them. And yet, I would say sometimes the characters chose to really take up that opportunity, and other times they chose to be a little more kind of standoffish and behind the scenes. So my favorite part of this was the first part. I liked Thom and Matt talking a lot, and it, to me, felt like it was a Matt development section, or it was pretending to be a Matt development section and was really a Thom development section. And I really liked that he was kind of throwing off a lot more information about Thom than we've previously had. And Matt is like admittedly just forgetting it immediately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Before we dive into kind of Thom, who I think is absolutely the thing we should be focusing on here, I'm curious if you remember who Thom's letter is from.
I don't, but I have some suspicions about who he's talking a lot about, which I guess is not the same person. I don't think it was. Who's Thom's letter from?
Thom's letter is from Moraine.
Oh.
Moraine gave the letter to Rand, who gave the letter to Matt, who gave the letter to Thom. It was one of the 2 letters that she had for Rand before she died in the previous book. Rand read one, the other is Thom's.
And presumably Moraine knows a lot about the larger structures of Thom's life. And interesting that would be, I mean, it's not a message to her love or anybody like that. It's to Thom. So interesting. Okay, I didn't remember that. So thanks for filling that in.
First off, don't assume that Thom isn't Moraine's love. Second, we should be very careful here because Thom is very cryptic about who the letter is from. And specifically, when asked by Matt who is the letter from, is it someone you left? The answer he gives is, yes, I left her. And so Thom may have slightly more complicated feelings about Moraine than I think I would have anticipated were it not for that response. But otherwise, yeah, I think the interesting thing here is just how much Thom seems to be dwelling on this letter and then simultaneously giving really good advice that Matt immediately forgets.
Yeah, in my notes, the first thing I wrote was that, like, it's really good advice, just tinged with a little sexism, because it's all kind of framed as, like, women are like this, and it's like, actually, what you're saying applies to all people, and it's good to just let people do what they want to do and try to help them and try to let them see the larger lessons, right? Like, it would be good parenting advice, and so I liked it a lot, but yeah, it didn't feel like it landed on willing ears.
Yeah, I think this actually kind of perfectly sums up what it is like to teach an introductory class, probably in any subject at the college level, right? You get up there and you give a wonderful story that has all of the things that they need and is a metaphor for what they're building in the class, and 90% of the people will get it, and the Matt Cawthon in the back of the room will not, even a little bit, and yet somehow will be smart enough to get an A- on your exam, and you'll be mad even while you're proud of them.
Well, and in my world, it's who you think about at like 3 a.m. when you wake up and can't sleep. You like worry about that student, and you're like, why? What they don't think about my class. Like, why am I thinking about that? But I think that's apt.
I think the next thing I just want to point out is Thom's story is framed, as you say, in a very sexist way. But I think it's teaching the lesson that a lot of people need to learn, that when people tell you they want to do something different than what you want them to do, most of the time it's not because the two of you want different things. It's just because you're misunderstanding what it is you're trying to do. And I always appreciate the few times we get mature people being mature in the Wheel of Time, because it doesn't happen often, and this is one of them.
That's nicely stated, and it is true that, you know, we do have these figures from this kind of older generation that aren't these stupid little 18, 19-year-olds, and they so rarely get listened to or get the spotlight like they do here. I mean, Moraine got it more often than any other, most likely, but it's really nice that Thom shares this kind of accumulated wisdom, and I like that it is framed as like, here's just some silly stories of me being a scamp, but then you're like, oh, I think this is deep mythology of this culture, of this community, right? Like, so my assumption is he's talking about more gays, right? That this is. Go ahead.
I don't think that is the case unless he is lying about the person being a bootmaker, right? Like, and I actually don't know if that timeline lines up. but it's possible. Continue with your theory.
Well, because I know we've talked before about how there are some hints at times that he could have. 15-year-old Tylor talked about maybe him being Elayne's father. Like that felt like it was possible, and seems like it could be. But it just felt to me that when he's talking about a woman being married to somebody who's like awful, it felt a lot like how we've had Morghese's relationship described. And I agree, like the theory requires that he's lying about the bootmaker part. I kind of assumed that's like, oh, I'll just throw in he's like a bootmaker, whatever, right? And then talking about how like she was fully in control, that feels like Morgase to me, right? That, again, she's better at the game than Thom is, maybe the only person better than Thom, and so she knows exactly what she's doing, and getting what she needs out of the relationship felt right to me. So that's just where my mind naturally went.
I just assume Thom has a type, but I actually like your theory even better. I think it works just as well either as a real story or as a metaphor. I'm willing to headcanon it either way. I think that makes a lot of sense. And you're absolutely right to point out, even if Thom is not telling a story about Morgase, I think he is intentionally telling a story about a woman who is just like Morgase, because guess who Matt needs to win over? It's Morgase's daughter. So I think that Matt is just fundamentally misunderstanding how good Thom's advice will be given his relationship to everyone involved in this story. I then actually want to use that as a transition. Thom surprised me in one place in this, and that was in his description of Egwene, because I kind of forgot they knew each other. Like, intellectually, I am aware that they shared a lot of the screen in the first book, but it's been like 3,000 pages since the last time those two characters were on screen together. And so to hear him be like, yeah, I've spent enough time with her to know, like, she's going to be a good Merlin, kind of made me very interested in where that plot goes, because I trust Thom. And as much as it's easy to forget, like, that first book is probably as long chronologically as any other book is. They've actually spent a significant amount of time together, and Thom is just like, yeah, I think she can take on queens.
Yeah, and then to that, he has seen her come up. I mean, in his periodic visits to the village, right? Yeah. One would assume. I mean, not that gives you as much as the experiences of the first book is. But I was just going to confirm that I also trust Thom's judgment, because everything we're told about him is that he's the most savvy and he's the most kind of worldly. He's been around the block and understands what's going on. And so if he's not worried about Egwene, then I do think that is Robert Jordan telling us we should not be worried about Egwene. And that's nice to hear. Again, kind of respected dude being, building off his experience. It makes sense in a lot of ways.
And that makes a lot of sense. I'm curious if you have any last thoughts on this Thom-Matt conversation, because I'm kind of at the point where I say we talk about the band briefly.
I think we can talk about the band.
So Vannon is still my favorite character because he's just a big old rotund guy who cannot be seen, and I think that is probably real and hilarious. The other thing that I really enjoy here is another example of Matt's kind of homespun leadership, where he is freaked out, but every one of his soldiers firmly believes that everything is going according to plan. And I don't think Matt would acknowledge that as his skill, but I think it's the reason that people who are as good at their jobs as Vannon follow him without question.
Well, and I felt like Matt felt a little different here, like he's a little more in control of his powers in some way, and I can't really define why. So it's a terrible insight to put on the record in a podcast, but it just felt to me like he's getting more comfortable as the general. It's not like it's coming from outside of him, right? That his two sides are merging a little bit more, and maybe it's just building those relationships kind of as you're implying, right? That these men have kind of shown their admiration and loyalty, so he's going to just kind of act on that, even if it's not earned in the way we think of it being earned yet.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. When you said you weren't sure the difference, I think it is that he is acting on instinct, and that instinct is probably informed by his past lives, but he's not having to directly think about his past lives to be a good general. And that feels like a pretty significant difference. I say then we jump into Elayne's POV, which means that we are going to begin by talking about the rumors in Saladar, I guess. And what I thought was our most interesting link, the fact that Nynaeve and Elayne are going to have chaperones. Vandene and Adelias will be traveling to Ibudar with them, which is most notable because I know the answer is no. But Greg, do you remember who Vandene and Adelias are?
I assume they came up in that chapter right before our long vacation about like who was reporting to who and who was scheming with whom, but I do not remember. No,
that is actually not correct. We are going all the way back to book 2. Remember when Moraine goes off on her own little quest for a while to a stormy cottage where she looks up some old books? That is Vandene and Adelias's cottage. These are very old Aes Sedai. It's most notable if you're watching the television show. Varen is spending her time at someone's cottage in the 2nd and 3rd season. That is actually a Aes Sedai who is kind of a merged Vandene-Adelias combo. But they exist. We remember them. I've now reminded you. Any thoughts on the fact that the girls are full Aes Sedai, but very clearly are not being treated as full Aes Sedai?
Well, it's an interesting question because I had a different answer before you just shared that. I felt like it was a way, because Thom reminds us that the Saladar Aes Sedai have major factions that he's worried about.
Yep.
And so it felt to me like one faction trying to control this new emerging faction, right? And I think Egwene's people is kind of a new faction breaking out that, you know, she elevated Elayne and Nynaeve, and there's a lot of questioning of that. And so, one of the factions wants to make sure they're not kind of going to get ahead in this race, quote unquote. So it felt more like that. The fact that these are kind of old, kind of Moraine friends makes me think they might be more helpful than controlling, but chaperone still makes me think controlling.
Yeah, and I think there are two kind of other little pieces of detail that might be helpful in this, but I think you're putting things together exactly right. The first is, don't quote me on this, but I'm fairly confident that Vandene and Adelias were brown and blue, and so not only are they kind of aligned with Moraine in terms of they literally met with her, but they also kind of fit the Saladar general tone. So that might make us think, for example, that they might be in Lelaine or Sheriam's side if we're thinking about what faction might be influencing things. The other thing to note about these two is that they were kind of separate from the Tower. Moraine went to them for things that she couldn't get in kind of the general organization. And so if we're worried about scheming and plotting and the different sides of things, they would be people who wouldn't have been involved in the past Tower politics. And so where they stand in Saladar feels like it's very much an open question, and it's unclear at the moment which faction they'd be directly kind of working with, which for me at least both raises questions about are they spies? Are they Black Aja? Are they all of these things start to open up when I'm maybe they're not one of the 3 main groups in Saladar.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that, it just feels like the more we look at the Aes Sedai, the less and less unified they are, right? So it's now this is potentially another group. And, I kind of would love to believe that there's some older conspiracy between Suan and Moraine, ready to step in now and guide Egwene and give her the kind of mentorship she needs. Yeah. And so they're not going with Egwene, they're going with the other two, but it feels not impossible that there's a kind of strand of that somewhere in this as well.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Elayne then talks to Birgitte, and we get just what I thought was a really true and heart-wrenching story about I don't want expectations to be too high because I can't meet them. And then I nod and go, that makes sense. Good scene, and have nothing else to say about it. Any thoughts here?
I liked Birgitte being back in the mix. It makes me nervous that she represents a schism between Elayne and Nynaeve and Egwene, right? Yeah. Because again, in all these complicated politics we're talking about, it would be nice to have our main 3 kind of united in every single way, and this just feels like a fuse. And when will it blow up? That this will hurt their relationship.
After that, Elayne and Aviendha finally get a chance to talk, and because it's Robert Jordan, there's so much nudity, I didn't even think to mention it. It's just a common thing that happens in this book now.
I thought this was a really well-written scene. It was really nice to get these characters talking about things instead of having three separate women all pining for Rand and worrying about the other two. But this feels like a scene that kind of resets the status quo, but doesn't actually move us forward meaningfully in any way. It's kind of people saying, like, yeah, in principle, I guess. What was your takeaway here?
Yeah, I was laughing because I missed that they were naked until somebody was like, put your robes on now. I was like, wait, again? Robert, come on. Like, what are you doing? And I think I've used this reference before, but when I was in high school, there was a very popular kind of reprisal of the R-rated comedy that featured Road Trip as a movie. And there's a scene where Tom Green, who's narrating Road Trip, is like, describing a scene of like exposition in a locker room, and one of the like moms listening is like, women don't just stand around topless. He's like, it's my story. Anyway, these other two chicks walk up. They're totally hot. That feels like Robert Jordan to me every time something like this happens. So there, listeners, have you thought about the movie Road Trip in 20 years? If so, you're the first.
You mentioned a movie that brought back the road trip, and I was like, yeah, Euro Trip from my right, different generations. It's also worth noting, you said like, oh, it's Robert Jordan. Robert Jordan is a pen name. His real name is James Oliver Rigney, and the only time that I will ever be like, oh, James, is when he does like some dumb like woman getting naked for no reason things. So, oh, James, we didn't need this one. But what did you think of the actual character dynamics and not the nudity?
Well, this felt like a scene that was necessary because we had the betrayal that has been weighing on Aviendha's mind for a while.
Yeah.
And it had felt like they had both already decided separately that they were just going to share Rand, and that would not be a problem. But we needed them actually expressing that to each other. And then we get that with the kind of revelations and kind of jeto of what Aviendha needs for that to kind of feel okay. It just felt to me purely perfunctory. It's like, we needed to get this out of the way. We got it out of the way as fast as we can, and we can move on now.
Yeah, I think that's about right. The one moment that really just made me laugh was Elayne being like, oh my god, I can't believe I said that I would share Rand with someone, and Aviendha being like, yeah, that sounds like a good plan, but I need to know you better. And I think that like switch was really funny, as was, hey, do you want to murder Min together? Because then there'd only be two of us. Excellent moment.
Very, very fun moment. And it's like, also, I mean, every time they bring up Min in these conversations, I just hear the Arrested Development. Her? Like, she's her? Yeah. She's the third in this. And we'll talk a little more about that next chapter, obviously.
And then I guess they laugh because men are dumb, and I don't disagree with them. Any final thoughts on this chapter?
Only to reveal to you that I just received a text message from your wife that says, haha, I just heard Tylor call you old, which cracked me up. So she's listening on the other side of the door. So kudos, shout out to former guest of the podcast staff, just owning both of us weirdos. Go ahead.
Didn't own me. I'm young. Chapter 41, A Threat. Min rides into the city of Camelin, noting that there are Aiel, and also there are stories about Rand's amnesty everywhere. She spots the two flags of the palace and thinks about the fact that she slipped her warder escort in order to get here alone. Eventually, she stalls outside of the palace, thinking that maybe now is the time for a dress, but eventually decides to be herself. She worries that she will lose herself for Rand, and then eventually she speaks to a maiden, apparently Elayne, and is led inside, eventually winning over the Aiel with her dry sense of humor. She sees Rand on his throne, noting that he is tired, and also having a viewing of him with lights trying to fill up a darkness, and then an aura of yellow, brown, and purple that makes her stomach clench. She sees no viewings around the nobles and is nervous as Rand approaches. We then switch into Rand's POV as he spins Min in excitement about seeing her, which is also seen by the nobles. They hug, and he playfully accepts her by arguing about the spin and whether or not it was something he should have done, and then he eventually sends his guards away as they head to his chambers, but he begins to worry about all of the balls that he has in the air in Camelin and the possibility that he drops one of them. At this point, Min and Rand begin to talk, but Min avoids mentioning Saladar until he does, and she seems relieved by the fact she doesn't have to hide it. He then takes Elayne's letter, which I thought was a little bit funny, mostly because she says she hopes Rand loves Min the same way she does, which is hilarious, and
and then Rand begins ranting about how confused he is with his feelings for Elayne. Min objects to him talking so much about Elayne, and then when he calls her a friend, she takes off her jacket and sits on his lap, and he says that he meant that he can share things with her that he wouldn't with others, but she asks him if he loves Elayne and Aviendha, and he says that maybe he does, but he won't go to them or anyone he loves because if he loves someone, they are a target. Min then insists that she will make Rand see her as a woman, and Min then tells him that there is an embassy from Saladar. Rand wonders what they want and if they will try to buy him like Elida has tried. Rand then asks who is with the embassy and seems briefly upset when she says that there are 9 of them, but does seem reassured when she says that they mean him no harm, even when she says that was not a viewing. She then tells him of the aura that she saw and says that it means that Aes Sedai will hurt him, and she cannot rule out the possibility that it is the Aes Sedai in the embassy. They both then begin to admire different things about each other because they are honest with one another, and then Min begins to worry that he is doubting her based on the look that he gives her, and he says that the embassy may only come 3 at a time. At this point, Sulin arrives and drops some china when she sees Min sitting on his lap, and he eventually keeps Min there to try to make sure that Sulin has to face down the fact that he is not with Aviendha. At this point, he tries to shame Sulin for being a bad servant, and he warns her that there is no harm to come to Min, but Sulin seems baffled by this, saying that only Aviendha would have any reason to do her harm. Min then notes that Sulin is a particularly bad servant, and when Rand gives a partial answer, Min begins to snuggle into him as Elayne enters. She reports both on Egwene's departure and on the arrival of the embassy, and then Min sees a vision that Elayne will have twins, which is explained to Elayne along with how Min knew this, and they immediately become fast friends. Rand then breaks up their discussion by talking about what is going on in the city, and Elayne asks how Rand can trust the Saladar Aes Sedai, given that they are clearly not dedicated to him and his cause. Min seems to have small details on all of the 9 who are with the embassy, but most of it is bad news for Rand, as the Aes Sedai seem more concerned with other loyalties or loyalties to their previous countries rather than anything that Rand wants. He then pledges to more or less play nice with the Aes Sedai, but also never trust them, and then Elayne says that she will name a daughter after Min and begins to leave, and Rand is awkward because he is once again alone with Min. So, Greg, there's lots of snuggling and flirting, the stuff you love in books. What did you think of A Threat?
Again, he repeats, her. It just felt like this was a major leveling up in this relationship. Like, I understand these two characters knew each other, but take out the snuggling, and this is how I feel when I go home and see somebody who never moved away from my hometown. Yeah. They're like, "Whoa, Greg, it's so good to see you, man. Like, let's get a beer. Let's do that." I'm like, we didn't really talk when I was here. Why are you excited to see me now? So it felt a little surprising for the most part. It's like, you realize you meant different things to each other, and that these two apparently meant a lot more to each other than we ever got a hint of. But it's weird. The lap sitting was a little weird and paternalistic in a way that Robert Jordan or James has returned to from time to time. So it all felt a little bit strange, but it again seemed like a necessary step that, like, we are building this side of the relationship, and you have to know that they've all accepted this as well as the other side that we were talking about last chapter.
Yeah, I have to be the one who admits at this point, when I was in, like, high school and college and middle school and probably grad school, honestly, I was not good at talking to girls. And so my type was women who would make the first move. And so I adored these Min chapters when I was young. I was like, yeah, if I was Rand, I never would have had a chance with Elayne or Aviendha, but Min will just say, I like you, let's do this. That's my kind of lady. So I always remember kind of loving these chapters as, like, I could relate to them. The only girls who I had any chance with were the ones who would probably go and sit on my lap at a theater party.
was that type of move in high school from both genders. It's just bringing it, it's like it's going back to like, oh yeah, the person who suddenly had no physical boundaries with you, and like the weird thrill that was at that age. Certainly. Yeah, and I mean, I think it just feels, for better or worse, it feels like young people when I read this, right? And so, sure, it'll work. I thought the idea kind of at the beginning that she's nervous and doesn't know what this engagement is going to be like, and then it all goes so swimmingly.
Yeah.
It made me think about how she knows from future visions that this is like going to be, and I assume he knows from like prophecies and stuff that she checks a box. It feels like there's just like no questions whatsoever. So even though we don't really know each other, but at the same time, it doesn't just feel like they're attracted to each other either, right? It feels more like it's fated than it's like a fun time.
I think the one really tricky thing to kind of keep in mind with these two characters in particular is that they actually did spend a substantial amount of time with one another. It was just between books. So remember at the end of book 2, Min is the one who finds Rand after he gets stabbed by Ishamael in the sky, and we get the weird, like, she curls up in bed with him to warm him up or something. And then the next book begins like 6 months later after they've been camped out in the mountains for a while, and Min and Rand are kind of confidants with one another. So this is another example of, I think if there was even just like a couple of short stories about that summer or that winter in between those books, this would feel really earned. And instead, I think you're exactly right to say on screen, there is no hint of this other than prophecy, but it actually does kind of make sense that Rand would go, oh, this is someone who I really trust and I think of as a friend. It's just, I needed a paragraph about it in that book, and then I might buy it 3 books later.
Yeah, that totally makes sense to me. And then quickly at the start of that book, she just runs off, right? Like,
yeah.
So
she gets sent off by Moraine, but yeah.
Okay. So I think of her as being inside the White Tower, kind of kicking around without a lot of direction. And so that's certainly what stands in my mind more than that time. But that you just gave me an excuse as to why that is.
So I'm curious about your thoughts on the Min POV section of this chapter, because I think you hit the nail on the head. The big dilemma here is how much she's worried about how this interaction with Rand is going to go and how much she will lose herself. I thought the best version of that was her almost stopping to buy a dress that felt like really kind of like visceral and lived in, because we know how important her wardrobe is to her. But I was almost kind of left at the end of it, like, why didn't we stay in her POV longer? I think it would have been really cool to see that scene from Min's perspective instead of Rand's, and I almost left the POV switch frustrated because Min was so fresh compared to Rand that we've gotten so much of.
Well, and given Min, I expect there to be visions, and there wasn't, right? It was just kind of the
there was
start
the
of
one,
that scene.
Yeah, there was the aura of him being hurt by the Aes Sedai, but that's it. Yeah.
And then we get from his perspective when she reveals about the daughters to come for the servant. So yeah, it felt a little bit like a waste. And when you switch mid chapter, and especially when you switch and stay in the same scene, I kind of expect there to be some kind of doubling or interesting factor, and it didn't seem like it really mattered which side they were on, perhaps. I wonder if Robert Jordan just wanted to be kind of from the male perspective, kind of turn it into the fantasy, right? Like of the women throwing out themselves at you instead of the kind of thinking behind that. But I don't know. It seemed unnecessary. I found myself kind of not caring too much about this chapter, so it's not like it ruined it for me or anything like that.
Yeah.
I just kind of was like, okay, so they're really close, and Min and Rand are, just going to be allies in the fight that's about to come, because we get these hints about, not even hints, but we get statements about the embassy that's now there and the number of them and the politics of it all. So, I'll steal your word from your reminder of confidant. It feels like they're just naturally right in that role, and they're going to be facing these forces together.
Yeah, I just thought it was really interesting how Rand is like, I will not allow Aviendha within a mile of me because she might die, and I will not allow Elayne within a mile of me because she might die. But sit on my lap, baby. Like, it seemed like Min is almost taking advantage of the fact that she's been friend zoned to try to get out of the friend zone, and good for her.
Yeah, I think that describes it pretty well.
So I then want to pull out the other characters who enter the room other than Min. So the first is Sulin, our Maiden of the Spear, who disobeyed Rand briefly, and so has Toe, and so now is serving as a servant. And she seemed appalled by the fact that Min is there instead of Aviendha. She has been one of the kind of advocates of Rand marrying one of the Aiel. And also, I thought it was very funny to see Rand kind of pushing her now for almost like, half a book. He's just been kind of like, oh, it's weird that she's dressing like a servant. And now Rand is willing to be like, you're just kind of a terrible servant. Get better if you're going to do this. And I thought that shift was both funny and honestly probably the right way to respond to someone trying to shame themselves via Giotto like that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's like Rand translated or transitioned into like it's not even that dramatic. It's just like where I grew up, we raised horses, and sometimes the horses would just start racing around the paddock, and you say, okay, the horse is feeling its oats, right? And that's what Rand feels like here. He's feeling his oats, right? Like he's just got like this burst of like awesome energy because the cute girl came and sat on his lap. So he's just gonna kind of be a little cock of the walk around everybody, and I think that pushing felt like, I guess you'd call that showing off, but it's not like he's actually trying to like show Min some new side of him. He's just like full of it because he's feeling good.
No, and I think that's exactly right. I did love the line, why would I ever hurt Min? Only Aviendha would have a reason to murder this girl. Like, it's very funny to me. All the Aiel are like, yeah, if someone has a crush on your man, just stab them. That's what you do.
It's called high school.
I do want to note the woman who is pregnant with twins, not a servant, a wise one, Elayne. And so the fact that Min immediately has like a close friendship /in with the wise ones feels really important, because with Aviendha gone and with Rand kind of jumping between cities, the wise ones kind of feel like one of the few consistent things he has in everywhere that he's ruling. So Min immediately being in with one of them feels kind of monumental for what her ability to influence things around Rand looks like.
Yeah, and I was thinking forward too about how Egwene wants to unite her Aes Sedai with the Aiel, and so like we got to build as many bridges between these cultures as we can. So the fact that a wise one is feeling good with Min, and Min will be tied in with Rand, it just all feels like we're supposed to see. I'm kind of picturing, I guess it's buttresses architecturally, right? Where it's not just one connection, but you're seeing more and more kind of sprouting between these two groups.
And I think it's actually telling. Elayne, I think this might be more or less a direct quote. She says something like, I would not trust any Amyrlin seat unless they prove themselves to be as honorable as Egwene. And I think that's a good sign for that relationship going forward, because guess who's the Amyrlin seat? I then kind of ended this chapter with like, okay, this feels like a chapter where Min arrives and kind of gets herself immediately into Rand's inner circle, and then a couple of women leave, and Rand's immediate reaction is like, oh, this is awkward. And maybe I was expecting Rand to kind of get over the awkwardness because there's a pretty girl in his lap, but I was maybe surprised by the tone of the ending of this chapter. So I'm kind of curious your thoughts on when or how this develops between these two characters, because it feels like we're just getting like a, hey, we're immediately in the middle of it, but at the same time, it doesn't actually feel like there's any real momentum to this burgeoning relationship.
I mean, you're exactly describing what I was like in high school with the forward women, right? It's like the dog that caught the tire. It's like, wait, now I need to like make conversation and be half of this interaction. That's not gonna go well. So yeah, it's funny and it's awkward and it still kind of works for me. I think I would have felt worse if he's just like grabbing her and going to the bedchamber, right?
Yeah,
and is
fair.
like somehow a smooth Lothario now. So it felt like at that moment that's still the Rand who's a shepherd, right? The woolhead, right? As Min keeps reminding him. So it felt right to me that we end on that kind of off-key note.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And we've been talking so much in this chapter about how these characters are young, and like that feels right? It's you ask out the girl, you get a yes, you go to the dance, and then you stand on the side of the dance floor because you don't know how to say, do you want to dance? And I feel like that's the phase that Min and Rand are at right now.
I think that's apt. Yeah, that's the right metaphor.
So next week, we have 3 chapters because we are plowing ahead. 6 weeks left. We will be talking about Chapter 42, The Black Tower, Chapter 43, The Crown of Roses, and Chapter 44, The Color of Trust. And as we get deeper and deeper into this book, I'm really curious, Greg, how are you feeling about it? This was one that kind of started on the slow side, but we said even though there's not a lot of plot, it felt better than some of the earlier slow starts. But now we're less than 200 pages from the end of the book and not really seeing a big climax looming. What are you kind of thinking as we get close to the end?
I'm going back to what I said, I think at least once so far, which is it just feels like the phase of the marathon where you're like, I just got to get the miles done, right? Like we're out of that opening fresh sprint, kind of grabbing attention and pulling people in, and we're just kind of, jogging along, seeing how far we can get and putting the characters into different situations. I do like more and more, it feels like you're just grabbing different names off a board and mixing them together for a little while and then splitting them up again and then mixing together a different. And that works. And it's incredible to me how big a cast we're getting of characters that I care about. And I think that just keeps expanding. So I'm here for it, and I'm looking forward to reading more and getting deeper and closer to the end next time through the glass columns.
So ends another episode of Through the Glass Columns. We thank you for joining us and continuing with us on our quest to cover all of the Wheel of Time in our own sweet time.
This podcast features original content developed by Tylor and Greg Cass and is not in any way affiliated with, associated with, or condoned by the Robert Jordan Estate, Tor Fantasy, Amazon, or our wives. All content is intended for entertainment and educational purposes only.
If you're enjoying this podcast, please seek out the books from your local bookshop or library and join us as we continue our journey. If you'd like to contact us to share your thoughts or give feedback, find us on Instagram or Threads by searching Through the Glass Columns.
Thank you once again for being a part of this community. If you're enjoying the show, please subscribe, leave us a review wherever you are listening, and recommend this show on your social media to help us grow our community. We look forward to welcoming you back next time on Through the Glass Columns.